Yes. Hi, welcome back. This is the 11th session of the Blessed Beauty of Bahá'u'lláh. And I just want to briefly mention that this series was put together by the Firm Foundation Academy, by the Desert Rose Baha'i Institute, and by the Clearwater Baha'is. So welcome back, Violetta. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. This is indeed the 11th session of the Blessed Beauty, but it's the first one I'm doing at home in Pointe-Noire in the Republic of Congo. So hello from the African continent. I want to just start today before we get into the life of Baha'u'lláh in Mazra'ih, Bahji, and his visits to Haifa by recapping very quickly the 9 years that Baha'u'lláh spent in the most great prison in Akka, during which he didn't see any greenery, no verdure for 9 years. And there were so many challenges for Baha'u'lláh. The martyrdom of Bahji, for which he revealed tablets for 3 years. The martyrdom of his own youngest son, Mirza Mehdi. Then he moved into Akka and he moved from house to house, 4, 5 houses in Akka. And then when he had settled into the house of Udi Khamar, which is right behind the house of Abud, where he would move later, unfortunately, 7 Baha'is decided to assassinate the covenant breakers that were causing Baha'u'lláh so much trouble. And that broke Baha'u'llah's heart. He was re-imprisoned, but his real shame came from the behavior of his followers. And he retired after that with a broken heart. But then, of course, victory always follows crisis in the life of Baha'u'lláh. And he moved into the house of Abud. And Abdu'l-Baha got married to Sarihanum. And Baha'u'lláh revealed the Kitab-i Aqdas. A few years later, about 2-3 years later, Abdu'l-Baha had been preparing for years his beloved father's retirement to the countryside. He had rented the Garden of Ridvan. He had rented the mansion of Mazra'ih for several years. He'd rented them for a period of 5 years. So he had long-term plans for Baha'u'lláh in the countryside. For him, this was going to happen. And of course, Baha'u'lláh would refuse to leave Akka, saying, I'm a prisoner. I'm a prisoner. And I think I had a conversation with my friend, Michael Day, an eminent Baha'i historian who wrote a trilogy on the Shrine of the Bab that you should all buy. It's Journey to a Mountain, Coronation on Carmel, and Sacred Staircase. And we agree that that story is not always told in the right way, is that Baha'u'lláh is the supreme manifestation of God. The supreme manifestation of God. He was not convinced to move to Mazra'ih. Baha'u'lláh always told his believers that they should follow the authority of the government under which they live. And when he was stating, I'm a prisoner, he was stating the truth. He was stating the farman. And when Abdu'l-Baha got the leading religious authority of Akka, Ottoman Palestine, to beg Baha'u'lláh on his knees, to kiss his hand, to beg him repeatedly, and Baha'u'lláh would say, I'm a prisoner, I'm a prisoner. This wasn't a process of convincing. This was a process of the manifestation of God, ensuring that he was still, that the farman was dead, basically, that he could move to the countryside. Because by repeating it, and by the senior religious authority of Ottoman Palestine confirming, it was as if that farman had been nullified in a sense. So it's important that we don't frame this as the Sheikh convinced Baha'u'lláh to move to Mazra'ih, because Baha'u'lláh can make anything happen. He can't be convinced to do anything. He was in charge of the whole proceedings of that event. And after that event, Abdu'l-Baha rented a carriage, which was a very rare occurrence in Akka at that time, and through the land gate brought Baha'u'lláh to Mazra'ih. And this is where the story begins today, part 9 of the chronology, day 11 of the narration. 1877, 1892, Mazra'ih, Bahji, and Haifa. This part covers the life of Baha'u'lláh between the ages of 60 in 1877 to the age of 75 in 1892, shortly before his ascension. The Almighty hath transformed this prison house into the most exalted paradise, the heaven of heavens. First section, 1877 to 1879, 2 years in Mazra'ih, in the middle of a garden. Once Abdu'l-Baha drove Baha'u'lláh to Mazra'ih, he returned to Akka to ensure his father's tranquility by shouldering as many responsibilities as he could. Mazra'ih was a delightful, pleasant mansion nestled in a vast plain with charming countryside and surrounded by a lush garden. The air was fresh, the water pleasant. It boasted views of the Galilee hills to the east and the Mediterranean Sea to the west, and it was quiet. It was Baha'u'llah's first haven of peace for decades, and he lived surrounded by nature. Baha'u'lláh would later recount the delightful scenery at Mazra'ih in a tablet to Mirza, speaking in delightful language about its beautiful vistas and the charm of the orange trees weighed down with fruit as brilliant as balls of fire. Mazra'ih was a small mansion, and Baha'u'lláh used the ground floor as a reception room, a Biruni, in which Baha'is attained his presence. His bedroom was on the upper floor of the mansion, with a balcony overlooking the beautiful countryside. The first 25 tumultuous years of Baha'u'llah's ministry were a series of grave afflictions, where Baha'u'lláh was imprisoned 5 times, tortured, stripped of his wealth and properties, poisoned several times, once almost fatally, banished to 4 cities in 3 countries, with his last perpetual banishment in the desolate stone wasteland of Akka, where his 22-year-old son had died in his arms. Baha'u'llah's move to this oasis of tranquility would be a turning point in his ministry, the inauguration of his final years in the plenitude of its glory and majesty. Baha'u'lláh was still a prisoner in perpetuity of the Ottoman Empire, and he described this transformation of surroundings in spiritual terms. The Almighty has transformed this prison house into the most exalted paradise. Abdu'l-Baha described this significant change in majestic terms. Baha'u'lláh proceeded out of the fortress with authority and might, and in a kingly mansion beyond the city made his home, even calling the event miraculous. And this is one of Baha'u'llah's greatest miracles, that he, a captive, surrounded himself with panoply and he wielded power. The prison changed into a palace. The jail itself became a Garden of Eden. I want to pause just 1 second and notice how Abdu'l-Baha is speaking about all of this as Baha'u'llah is doing, not mentioning the fact that he rented Mazra'ih, he fixed it up, he put a bath, he rented the Riḍván garden. And this is very important because when Shoghi Effendi, his grandson, will begin telling the history of the faith, he will also never mention himself. (1877 to 1879), feasts at Mazra'ih. This is a photograph of the mansion of Mazra'ih where the feasts were held, as in the story that I'm about to tell you. Mazra'ih was a source of delight for both the resident Baha'is and the pilgrim Baha'is, elated at Baha'u'llah's new freedom, so happy for him and his wonderful living conditions. Baha'is in Baghdad, Adrianople, the most great prison, and Akka had developed the practice of holding feasts, something that became much easier to do once Baha'u'llah lived in Mazra'ih. After obtaining Baha'u'llah's permission, the believers would hold feasts in various locations in the countryside, which Baha'u'llah sometimes attended. At times, Baha'u'llah would sit among them, or as they all stood, he would mingle, speaking to them one at a time or in groups, sometimes even eating with them. before they returned at night to the pilgrim house, the Khani Avamid in Akka. On one occasion, a Baha'i had invited Baha'u'lláh and the believers in Akka for lunch on the first day of Ayyamaha, and a large tent was set up in a delightful open space in the entrance in front of the garden at Mazra'ih. 200 Baha'is attended and gathered in front of the tent. Baha'u'lláh came down from the upper floor of the mansion around noon and entered the tent with great dignity, and Mirza Aghajan chanted a dawn prayer, which Baha'u'lláh had revealed that very morning. After the prayer, Baha'u'lláh invited the guests, the believers, to sit. He spoke for some time. Then he asked, "What happened to the feast? Is it really going to happen?" The believers sprung to their feet and lunch was brought in, placed on a low table in the center of the tent where Baha'u'lláh was sitting with some of his sons, calling individual believers to come and join them. 1878, Baha'u'lláh sends Jamal Effendi to India. As an homage to Jamal Effendi's tireless teaching activities on the Indian subcontinent, and because we do not have a photo of Jamal Effendi, on the left, I've put a photograph of Pritam Singh, believed to be the very first Baha'i of Sikh origin in India, declaring in 1905. And on the right, the flourishing Baha'i community of Burma in 1897, as they celebrate the completed sarcophagus, which they are about to send to Abdu'l-Baha. And this story is taking place in those regions. So these are just illustrative photographs. By the time Baha'u'lláh arrived in Akka, the Baha'i faith had spread from Persia to Iraq, Turkey, the Holy Land, Syria, Lebanon, Turkmenistan, Egypt, the Sudan, and India, where some Afghans had established a printing press under the imprint Nasiri and had begun attracting believers. They wrote to Baha'u'lláh asking if he could send them an experienced and knowledgeable Baha'i teacher. In 1878, Jamal Effendi, a tireless and renowned teacher of the faith, came on pilgrimage after years of promulgating the cause throughout Persia and the Ottoman Empire. Baha'u'lláh sent Jamal Effendi to India after his pilgrimage to his presence, where he traveled and taught extensively throughout India, Ceylon, and Burma for 10 years, creating bonds of friendship and love with everyone thanks to his pleasant manner and kind character. He received several encouraging tablets from Baha'u'lláh, who showered his confirmations on his teaching work and assured him of his good pleasure. And Baha'u'lláh also addressed Indian believers in his tablets. After returning for a short pilgrimage to the Holy Land, Baha'u'lláh sent Jamal Effendi back to India, and he traveled to Badakhshan, Balkh, Burma, Ceylon, Java, Kashmir, Ladakh, Lahore, Malaya, Punch, Punjab, Siam, Tibet, Yarkand, and the islands of Celebes and Bali, establishing the Baha'i faith far and wide in the remote Indian subcontinent during Baha'u'llah's lifetime. 1878 to 1879, pilgrims from the remote village of Saisan. What you see here is one of the oldest photos of the Baha'is of Saisan. The third man from the left is one of the two believers who carried the Narcissus to Baha'u'lláh in the Holy Land. In the background of this photograph, you see some beautiful white narcissus. This is a story about flowers. Saisan was a remote village nestled in barren mountains, approximately 70 kilometers, 40 miles southwest of Tabriz in Azerbaijan. That would be the northwest of Iran. In 1850, shortly after the martyrdom of the Bab, a wave of excitement and conviction swept throughout Azerbaijan and the village, and 2,700 of the 3,000 inhabitants of Saisan, 90% of the population, became Babis and later Baha'is. The first group of Saisan pilgrims to the Holy Land included Ismail Agha, who later became Abdu'l-Baha's faithful gardener. And they arrived in about 1878, bringing great happiness to Baha'u'lláh with their zeal, their enthusiasm, and their sweet provincial remarks. The Saisanese were saddened by the lack of fresh vegetables in Akka and invited Baha'u'lláh to come back to Saisan with them for their wonderful vegetables. Before they left, Baha'u'lláh advised them to plant potatoes. This is something that Abdu'l-Baha will do in his ministry as well. Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha had perfect knowledge of entire fields of knowledge, including agriculture. So Baha'u'lláh advised them to plant potatoes, and they returned to Saisan with a stock of potato seeds. The new crop flourished in the soil of Azerbaijan, and with time, other farmers in the area also adopted the crop, which became a staple food of the region, saving them from famine when their traditional grain crops failed some years later. This is why obedience is important. Had they not done exactly what Baha'u'lláh had said, they would have died of hunger. As soon as the first group of pilgrims returned to Saisan, 2 of the pilgrims set out for Akka again immediately, but this time with the most befitting gift they could find for their beloved Baha'u'lláh, 2 pots of narcissus, a beautiful white flower, and the Persian symbol for purity and love, which they carried on their heads with a mule carrying the rest of their belongings, roughly 1,100 kilometers, 700 miles of desert, mountain, and border guards. They entered Baha'u'llah's presence with swollen and blistered feet and laid their gift of living beauty carried with zeal and love before the Blessed Beauty, who showered them with blessings, bounty, and favor. Their gift was not only accepted, but considered the most precious gem that could ever be presented, the richest and finest gift in the world. Between the 12th and the 17th of March, 1879, the king and the beloved of martyrs. The king and the beloved of martyrs are 2 brothers. They are also called the twin shining lights. The Persian word for this is Nurayn Inaniran. Nurayn Inayirain. Nurayn Inayirain. The king of martyrs, the Persian is Sultanush Shuhada. His name was Mirza Muhammad Hassan. And the beloved of martyrs, Mahbubush Shuhada, is Mirza Muhammad Hussein. Hassan and Hussein, Mirza Muhammad both. Mirza Muhammad Hassan and Mirza Muhammad Hussein were born into an illustrious Babi family. They had attained the presence of the Bab in Esfahan at the dinner where the Bab gave a little bit of his food to the father and mother of Munire, who could not conceive a child, and Munire was born 9 months later. That famous dinner, they served the food. They were very young at the time. They were teenagers. They also attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad, and they had been the recipients of many tablets of Baha'u'lláh. They were highly prosperous merchants in Esfahan, utterly detached and generous, and helped both all their fellow believers, but they also were very generous to the needy, providing food during famines and renowned throughout Esfahan for their trustworthiness. The Imam Jumi of Esfahan, leader of Friday prayers, Mir Muhammad Hussein, entrusted the management of his affairs to the capable brothers. After his investment had prospered, he realized he owed the brothers a considerable amount of money for their services. And instead of paying them, he decided to kill them. So Baha'u'lláh condemned this deeply evil man as Raksha, the she-serpent, for his swift and very violent attack on the compassionate brothers. Brothers were executed on the 17th of March, 1879, their arms wrapped around each other, each one pleading with the other to be martyred first. Many in the crowd, clamoring for their execution, had over the years been the recipient of their generosity. Even their executioner, a man named Ramazan, to whom Mirza Hassan, the king of martyrs, gave a precious ring from his own finger. After the martyrdom, ropes were tied to their feet and their bodies dragged through the streets of Esfahan for all to see, before being abandoned in a dilapidated building and later buried by their younger brother. Their entire vast estate was confiscated, including their vast stores of merchandise and considerable financial assets. Their homes were plundered, and even some of their trees were uprooted and stolen. Their families were left in completely empty houses, helpless, terrified, and surrounded by a hostile mob. For years and years after 1879, Baha'u'lláh revealed 100 tablets in praise of the twin shining lights. Mirza Muhammad Hassan and Mirza Muhammad Hussein's martyrdom shook the Baha'i community to its core and brought Baha'u'lláh incalculable sorrow. Baha'u'lláh named the two brothers Sultanush Shuhada, king of the martyrs, and Mahbubush Shuhada, beloved of the martyrs. And as he had done after Badi's martyrdom, he lamented their loss for years, revealing almost 100 tablets in their honor, in which he extolled their station and virtues, praised their sacrifice. But perhaps the most astounding statement Baha'u'lláh makes in a tablet to one of the Afnans, male relatives of the Bab, is that the sacrifice of the king and the beloved of martyrs made a great impression, exerted a more influence, and was more heartbreaking than the martyrdom of the Bab. In these 100 tablets, Baha'u'lláh refers to the brothers as twin shining lights, as the great trust of God, as the spirit which appeared in the form of a human temple to serve God, as the tree of love, the breeze of God that wafted over the city, the luminous stars, the ocean of the love of God, and a fruit upon the tree of fidelity, among other designations. Baha'u'lláh also affirming their martyrdom had been the greatest sacrifice in this cause, through which the standard of victory were hoisted and the horizon of steadfastness illumined. In a tablet to Vargha, Baha'u'lláh describes their spiritual recreation during their pilgrimage to Baghdad, affirming that following their return to Isfahan, the hand of power exalted them among the believers, and the clouds of heaven and generosity rained wealth, luck, and fame upon them. Addressing himself to Sheikh Kazimi Samandar, Baha'u'lláh states that the soul of the Prophet Muhammad himself wept at their martyrdom. Again in a tablet to Vargha, Baha'u'lláh proclaims that God had bestowed them special favors, that they had appeared among the people as the embodiments of honor and glory, that their true station was so lofty it would dumbfound the people. In another tablet, Baha'u'lláh declares that the king and the beloved of martyrs had attained the station of martyrdom twice. Once during their life, so fully had they sacrificed themselves for the faith, and once in death, and that their living martyrdom was astonishingly glorious. And in another tablet, Baha'u'lláh testifies that the messengers of God and his chosen ones were desirous of attaining the exalted station of the king and the beloved of martyrs. I think one of the things that makes this story so utterly heartbreaking is that they weren't murdered because they were Babis or Baha'is. They were murdered because a man didn't want to pay them the money he owed them, and he just decided to kill two saintly human beings just for a base question of money. Between the 17th of March and the 24th of April, 1879, the Lahi-Burhan, Tablet of the Proof. On the right is a man named Masud Mirza, the son of Nasruddin Shah and the governor of Isfahan, and one of the men responsible for the martyrdom of the king and the beloved of martyrs. And on the right, of course, is Sheikh Muhammad Taqi, known as Akka Najafi, one of the sons of Sheikh Bakir the Wolf, but we couldn't find pictures of Sheikh Bakir. Very shortly after their martyrdom of the king and the beloved of martyrs, Baha'u'lláh revealed the weighty Lahi-Burhan, Tablet of the Proof, unleashing the wrath of God on Sheikh Bakir, the wolf, and Mir Muhammad Hussein, the she-serpent, who had decided to kill the brothers, for their vile, despicable roles in the senseless death of the king and the beloved of martyrs. A copy of the Lahi-Burhan arrived in Tehran on the 24th of April, 1879, 38 days after the martyrdom of the king and the beloved of martyrs. And Mirza Abul Fazl made 2 copies in his own handwriting and delivered them to Sheikh Bakir and Mir Muhammad Hussein. In the Lahi-Burhan, Baha'u'lláh stigmatizes the 2 Muslim clerics, apostrophizing one and the other as the heedless one and the perverse hater, and the ignorant who has gone far astray and made the Prophet Muhammad to lament, and the soul of the chaste one Fatimah, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad and the holiest woman of Islam, to melt, and the inmates of the highest paradise to weep, and the angel Gabriel who have appeared to the Prophet Muhammad as the Holy Spirit to groan, and all created things to lament. Baha'u'lláh addresses Sheikh Bakir, who issued their death warrant, declaring, "Hadst thou realized what thou hadst done, thou wouldst have cast thyself in the fire, or abandoned thy home and fled into the mountains." In a deeply condemnatory statement to Mir Muhammad Hussein, Baha'u'lláh prophesies, "O heedless outcasts, ere long will the breaths of chastisement seize thee, as they had seized others before thee." And after being exiled from Isfahan, Mir Muhammad Hussein wandered from village to village, afflicted with a terrible, vile form of throat cancer, and died in such disfavor that no one attended his funeral. As Baha'u'lláh lived in the countryside, the Holy Family stayed in Akka. And this is a portrait of the Holy Family's life in Akka during the same time that Baha'u'lláh is in the countryside in Mazra'ih and Bahji, so between 1877 and 1892. It's a series of vignettes to give you an idea what is happening to the family of Baha'u'lláh while Baha'u'lláh is in the countryside. Now, Sarihanum, Baha'u'llah's beloved wife and his consort in all the worlds of God, she remained in Akka, and she remained in the house of Abud. When Baha'u'lláh left Akka and took up residence in Mazra'ih, Sarihanum was 57 years old, and they had been married for 42 years. Nawab and Baha'u'lláh had never been separated, except for Baha'u'llah's incarceration in the Siachal and his 2 years in Kurdistan, and some of his travels in Iran for proclamation. During the long march from Baghdad to Constantinople, they had traveled in the same howdah. And Sarihanum had shared his imprisonment in the most great prison. Yet when Baha'u'lláh moved to Mazra'ih, Sarihanum remained in the house of Abud with Abdu'l-Baha, her daughter-in-law and Abdu'l-Baha's wife, Sarihanum, then 31 years old, and her sister, Bahí, and 2 grandchildren. In the Palestine of the 1870s, even traveling the short distance of 7 kilometers, 4.3 miles between Akka and Mazra'ih was very taxing and very complex for a woman. Man could simply either walk or ride a mule, but a woman couldn't do that. The roads were terrible. They were all dirt roads. And as custom dictated, they could never travel separately from the men. They had to wear veils. They had to travel in howdahs. If Sarihanum had moved to Mazra'ih, she would have been left alone and isolated in the countryside, while Bahá'u'lláh made his frequent trips to Akka. And while her son, daughter-in-law, and her children were in Akka, she would have been all alone. It was very, very complicated for women to move around, and she would have had to accompany Baha'u'lláh on every trip. And really, the most important reason why Sarihanum stayed behind in Akka is because she had become immensely frail. 25 years of exile, lack of food, bad water, illnesses, constant travel in difficult conditions and inclement weather, incarceration for 2 years during the most great prison, losing her beloved son, Mirza Mehdi, and exerting herself beyond her strength in arduous work for her family, had left deep marks on Sarihanum's delicate body and on her delicate health. Baha'u'lláh spent long stretches of time with Sarihanum in the house of Abud during the winter, and he wrote her many, many kind and loving letters full of feeling and deep care during the summer and spring when he was in Mazra'ih and Bahji. In an illuminated tablet displayed in the International Archives building, Baha'u'lláh writes to his beloved wife and hopes that she is well and gives her health advice. In another moving tablet, Baha'u'lláh bears witness to the difficulties Sarihanum endured in the path of God, exhorting his beloved wife to not let such afflictions cause her sadness. In the name of God, O Hanum, this is Baha'u'lláh talking to his wife in a letter. It's a love letter from a manifestation of God to his wife. I mean, we're so lucky to have this. In the name of God, O Hanum, O Amatallah, that is, O my handmaid, O thou the handmaid of God, it is hoped that in the path of his love, thou art sanctified from all else save him, fixing thy gaze upon the holy court in such wise that the tribulations encompassing thee in the path of God, the King, the Omnipotent, the Protector, the Self-Subsisting, will not cause thee sadness. During the same period of time, from 1877 to 1892, Abdu'l-Baha is Baha'u'llah's shield in Akka. This is an aerial view of the city taken in May 1972. Abdu'l-Baha carried a staggering weight of responsibilities in Akka, enabling Baha'u'lláh to devote himself completely to one activity important above all others, and that is his revelation. Baha'u'lláh took on the leadership of the Baha'i community, guided its growth, managed the increasing flow of pilgrims. In his Biruni, the office he rented across from the house of Uli Kamar, across from Genoa Square, Abdu'l-Baha met everyone in Akka, from Ottoman officials to religious leaders and the destitute and suffering. And there was a special kind of coffee they brewed in Abdu'l-Baha's Biruni that everybody wondered, it's so good, what does he put in it? Baha'u'lláh once stated that in Baghdad, and for the story, this is something he said to Haji Mirza Haydar Ali. The story comes from Haji Mirza Haydar Ali's memoirs. Baha'u'lláh once stated to Haji Mirza Haydar Ali that in Baghdad, he had met with believers and officials, and that by contrast, in the Holy Land, he had, quote, completely closed the door of association with the people. Keenly aware of Abdu'l-Baha's protective role, Baha'u'lláh stated that his son had made the sacrifice of taking upon himself this arduous task for our comfort. He is a mighty shield facing the world and its people, and so he has relieved us from every care, stating that Abdu'l-Baha faced every ordeal and suffering, because to deal and associate with these people is the most arduous task of all. And Baha'u'lláh knows this because Baha'u'lláh lived it when he was in Baghdad, and Abdu'l-Baha was only 12 years old. He was 19 when they left, but he was too young to shoulder any kinds of responsibilities like these. Abdu'l-Baha's 24-year-old half-brother, Muhammad Ali, was deeply, deeply jealous of Abdu'l-Baha's exalted relationship with Baha'u'lláh and Baha'u'llah's constant praise of his eldest son. Remaining behind in Akka was also an attempt by Abdu'l-Baha to lessen the fire of envy that burned and raged and devoured the heart of Muhammad Ali. But it was a forced separation from Baha'u'lláh that cost him, because he loved his father, wished he could be with him more often. But to not excite the jealousy of Muhammad Ali, he refrained from visiting Baha'u'lláh too often. And it caused both father and son, both Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha, pain to be separated like that because of this man's jealousy. And Baha'u'lláh wrote moving and tender and heartbreaking tablets to Abdu'l-Baha, lovingly asking him to please come and visit him. It's important to understand exactly how toxic Mirza Muhammad Ali was. This is a photograph of him around the age of 16 in 1868 in Edirne, 10 years before the story recounted here. After his teenage declaration of prophethood in Edirne, if you remember, Mirza Muhammad Ali continued on this path of ambition and sedition and never followed Abdu'l-Baha's example of humility and servitude to Baha'u'lláh. More than anything, Muhammad Ali wanted to emerge from his relative obscurity, and he wanted to stake a claim to some sort of position for himself in the faith. So he started to write letters and sent them to Persia in secret, and his behavior pained Baha'u'lláh greatly. But Baha'u'lláh concealed his sins. The most perceptive and deepened and devoted and pure-hearted Baha'is immediately felt Mirza Muhammad Ali's arrogance and superiority. When Haji Muhammad Tahiri Malmiri, the ancestor of the entire Tahirzadeh family, which include Adib Tahirzadeh, the member of the House of Justice and the eminent Baha'i historian and author of Revelation of Baha'u'lláh, from which the story is taken. When Haji Muhammad Tahiri Malmiri first met Muhammad Ali in Nabil's apartment in Akka, he got immediately depressed, and the joy in his heart turned to sadness and distress. And he stayed in that gloomy, dispirited state until he met Abdu'l-Baha later that day, and his heart was again filled with joy. It's a good description of why we're asked to shun covenant breakers, because they can overtake one's heart. This is a little vignette of a memorable visit to the house of Baha'u'llah's faithful brother, Mirza Musa. And this is not a photograph of Akka. It's a photograph of old Nazareth taken between 1934 and 1937. But Nazareth is also in Palestine. And I liked this picture because we can imagine maybe similar streets with people dressed similarly and people walking to Mirza Musa's house. You know, it's a picture filled with life. People talking, children, market stalls. On one of his visits to Akka, Baha'u'lláh stayed for 8 days and 9 nights in the home of Mirza Musa, his faithful brother and apostle of Baha'u'lláh, situated near the entrance to the White Market. Every day of his stay, Baha'u'lláh allowed all of the Baha'is to enter his presence, and they sat there spellbound by his utterances. Baha'u'lláh, during this momentous visit, showered infinite bestowals on his faithful brother Mirza Musa and offered a prayer that the believers' hearts would become illuminated, their souls sanctified from attachment to all save him, and their steps made firm so that they would remain steadfast as they arose to serve his cause. And now section 3, the Garden of Ridvan, also during this time period. I'm going to put various vignettes from various years. I just wanted to gather them under the umbrella of the Garden of Ridvan, just to give, instead of interspersing them throughout the chronology, for this part was a little bit difficult because many of the vignettes during this time do not have an exact date. So it was easier for me to create little sections that were during the same time. They were chronological as far as I could tell, but they were grouped by place. So the Garden of Ridvan and the Holy Family in Akka, those types of things. And this is kind of an extraordinary, it's one of my favorite periods of Baha'u'llah's life, because he is allowed to shine in the full glory of his splendor in surroundings that are befitting to the King of Kings, the blessed beauty, the supreme manifestation of God. But it's very bittersweet, because the more we advance in this part, the closer we get to the ascension of Baha'u'llah. So it's at the same time my favorite and least favorite, you know. It's so glorious, and the last years of Baha'u'llah are so glorious, but it's so sad because you just want it to go on and on and on, you know. And this is a perfect example. This is just a perfect example. The most beautiful garden in the world. The Garden of Ridvan was a small green island in the middle of a little Namain river, 1 kilometer, 0.6 miles east of Akka. On either side of the garden, the river was 4 meters, so about 14 to 15 feet wide, and 1 meter deep, 3 feet deep. It's a small river. You can wade across it, depending on your height. Bordered with weeping willows, beautiful trees if you've never seen one. They look like they have hair that's just draping like this, you know, and dipping into the water. They're just gorgeous trees. They look like they have hair. Long draping branches that love to just reach down into the water, often found near rivers. And the garden was, and there were countless fish swimming around this shallow river. So it must have been absolutely delightful for the little children, you know, so many things to see. And in the time of Baha'u'llah, the garden was laid out with flower beds that were filled with countless flowers of every color, as well as sweet smelling herbs, and decorated with many flowering bushes and fruit trees. So really, in a sense, I like to imagine that the Garden of Ridvan was created by all these Persian gardeners who were recreating Mazandaran, that beautiful region that Baha'u'llah was from in Iran, with the famous for its citrus fruit and its fruit trees and its weather that was just so propitious to plants and flowers. There was a splashing fountain in the time of Baha'u'llah, and now also distributing water to the entire garden and rippling as it flowed over a stone platform under 2 large mulberry trees, which are trees that give out mulberry fruit, which is really delicious, very delicious fruit, kind of like berries. And the branches of the trees, benches nestled around the trunks of the trees. And you note this, of course, from this photograph. You can see these benches nestled around trunks. The Ridvan garden blazed with colors and scents and filled with a delightful heavenly atmosphere. Elegant pomegranate trees and their large scarlet flowers, blossoming shrubs, the intermingled scent of roses, bergamot, mint, thyme, and lemon-scented verbena, perfuming the air and mixing with the earthy scent of red, white, and pink geraniums. It became one of Baha'u'llah's favorite retreats during his years in Mazra'ih and Bahji, and he called the Garden of Ridvan the New Jerusalem and our verdant isle, and frequently said to his gardener Abul Kazim, "This is the most beautiful garden in the world." I just want to pause for a minute and say that Abdu'l-Baha had been preparing this garden for Baha'u'lláh for years. And it was the perfect gift, similar in a sense to when Baha'u'lláh lived in Baghdad and his beloved brother Mirza Musa rented a farm called the Mazra'ih for Baha'u'lláh, and Baha'u'lláh loved that farm. And when they were in Edirne, the believers rented a garden for Abdu'l-Baha. And now that they were in Akka, Abdu'l-Baha surpassed all of those gifts by giving his father the Garden of Ridvan, which is a gift Baha'u'lláh enjoyed until the day he died. The most beautiful gift ever, planted with love, cared for with love and devotion, given with love. I mean, such a love story, the Garden of Ridvan. And it really was a symbol of devotion and sacrifice, because most of the flowers and most of the shrubs, most of the flowering trees, most of the fruit trees were carried on foot from Iran by pilgrims, because don't forget the Holy Land is a desert. So they had to come from somewhere. Baha'u'llah's old gardener, and this is perhaps the most touching story, Baha'u'llah's old gardener from his home in Tehran, I mean, imagine how many decades ago that was, remembered Baha'u'llah's favorite flower, which was a rare white rose with a golden center, brownish stalks and shiny leaves, and the most delightful fragrance. And over time, many bushes of Baha'u'llah's favorite rose flowered in the Garden of Ridvan. The cream and gold of the flowers and their burnished brown leaves, creating a peaceful note of harmony in the garden. The devoted gardeners. This is Abul Kazim Manshadi from the village of Manshad in the district of Yazd, who worked in the Ridvan garden for many years from the time of Baha'u'lláh to the time of Abdu'l-Baha. The Baha'i gardeners, closely guided and supervised by Abdu'l-Baha, transformed the Ridvan garden into a paradise of beauty, fragrance, color, and harmony through dedication and just simple, very hard work, bringing in large quantities of soil from the surrounding areas for the flower beds. In some of his tablets, Baha'u'lláh speaks about the flowers and plants of the Ridvan garden and expresses warm appreciation for his gardener's devotion. Abdus Salih was a loyal, steadfast, and humble man who often attained the presence of Baha'u'lláh and earned the bounty of his good pleasure. After he passed away, Baha'u'lláh revealed a tablet of visitation in his honor and delivered a eulogy for him that was later published. Abul Kazim, a massive, strong, broad-shouldered man, was the first gardener to dedicate his entire life to serving Baha'u'lláh in the Garden of Ridvan. He welcomed, and it was chiefly through his tireless efforts that the garden was built. And this is Abul Kazim Manshadi is the man you see here. This is the man we're speaking about right now. He welcomed Baha'i pilgrims and residents to the garden, lovingly entertained them, and ensured they enjoyed their visit. He also protected the garden from the masses of Akka residents who wanted to come in and would have trampled all over Baha'u'llah's flower beds. No. He could not have that. Agha Muhammad Ibrahim was Abul Kazim's brother, and he served as a gardener at Bahji and other places. Both brothers served in the gardens of Mazra'ih, Bahji, Riḍván, Junayn, and other gardens for more than 3 decades. This is one of my favorite stories in the entire chronology. One of the reasons it's my favorite story in the entire chronology is because the person and the tree that we're going to be speaking about are in the picture here. That's Abul Kazim, and that's a mulberry tree. And it looks like he's thinking about this story. So this story is called the Plague of Locusts. One day, during a hot summer, a plague of locusts descended on the countryside outside of Akka and began chomping on everything and devouring the leaves of Baha'u'llah's shady mulberry tree. Abul Kazim flat out panicked and ran to the little house at the end of the garden and informed Baha'u'lláh, "My lord, the locusts have come and they're eating away the shade from above thy blessed head. I beg of thee to cause them to depart." But Baha'u'lláh, probably very much enjoying his gardener freaking out, said, "The locusts must be fed. Let them be." So Abul Kazim was losing it by this point. He's so distressed, he returned to watch the locust eat his garden in silence. And that's why I love this picture, because he has his arms crossed and it looks like he's watching locusts eat his garden. So it's just a perfect picture. So at one point, he's watching the locust eat his garden and he just can't take it anymore. He really, really can't. He can't bear this destruction. So he returns to Baha'u'lláh and he literally begs Baha'u'lláh to send the locusts away. I mean, can you imagine going to a manifestation of God and talking to him about insects? That's a little bit, he was very devoted. He's a passionate man and he loved his job. I don't think I could have done it. But anyway, so he went to talk to Baha'u'lláh about the insects again, and Baha'u'lláh went into the garden and he stood beneath the locust-covered mulberry trees, which provided him shade. And he addressed the ravenous insects and said, "Abul Kazim does not want you. God protect you." And then he shook the hem of his robe and instantly the locusts flew away as if they were one insect and not 2 million insects. They were just gone. They totally vanished. When Abul Kazim recounted this story to May Maxwell, he was so overcome with emotion that he touched his eyes and said, "Oh, blessed are these eyes to have seen such things. Oh, blessed are these ears to have heard such things." This is a very beautiful photograph of the little one-room house in the Garden of Ridvan where Baha'u'lláh could rest and where he revealed tablets. And this is for a story about revelation and the Garden of Ridvan. Baha'u'llah's vision of the Maid of Heaven in the Garden of Ridvan. Baha'u'lláh revealed a touching tablet which now hangs in the small house in the Ridvan garden, where he expresses his enjoyment of the serenity, the peace, and the spiritual feeling pervading the garden. On the morning of the Blessed Friday, we proceeded from the mansion and entered the garden. Every tree uttered a word, and every leaf sang a melody. The trees proclaimed, "Behold the evidence of God's mercy," and the twin streams in the eloquent tongue recited the sacred verse, "From us all things were made alive." In 1879, Baha'u'lláh revealed a significant and celebrated passage on trustworthiness in the Garden of Ridvan, in which he describes his vision of the Maid of Heaven appearing in the Garden of Ridvan, standing on a pillar of light and calling out loudly to all the inhabitants of the heavens and the earth, extolling trustworthiness in the most exalted terms. So important is this tablet revealed in the Garden of Ridvan that Baha'u'lláh included this passage in 3 other tablets: the tablet of Ishrakat, the tablet of Tarazat, and a tablet revealed in honor of Haji Mirza Buzurgi Afnan, the custodian of the Bab's house in Shiraz. This passage is also memorable for Baha'u'llah's vivid description of the Ridvan garden, calling it his green island with its flowing streams and sunlight-dappled, lush green trees. I want to share this with you because we can never speak enough about trustworthiness. And this was revealed in the Garden of Ridvan in 1879. We will now mention unto thee trustworthiness and the station thereof in the estimation of God thy Lord, the Lord of the mighty throne. One day of days we repaired unto our green island. Upon our arrival, we beheld its streams flowing and its trees luxuriant and the sunlight playing in their midst. Turning our face to the right, we beheld what the pen is powerless to describe, nor can it set forth what the eye of the Lord of mankind witnessed in that most sanctified, that most sublime, that blessed and most exalted spot. Turning then to the left, we gazed on one of the beauties of the most sublime paradise, standing on a pillar of light and calling aloud, saying, O inmates of earth and heaven, behold my beauty and my radiance, and my revelation, and my effulgence. By God, the true one, I am trustworthiness, and the revelation thereof, and the beauty thereof. I will recompense whatsoever will cleave unto me, and recognize my rank and station, and hold fast unto my hem. I am the most great adornment of the people of Baha, and the vesture of glory unto all who are in the kingdom of creation. I am the supreme instrument for the prosperity of the world, and the horizon of assurance unto all beings. This is a perfect example of the bittersweet nature of this part. It's immensely exciting that Baha'u'lláh finally arrives in Bahji, but it is also the place where his ascension takes place. Again, apologies. The source for this quote is not the hidden words. I have to fix this at some point. I want to begin this part by reading to you a quote about the mansion of Bahji from Baha'u'lláh. Greetings and salutations rest upon this mansion, which increaseth in splendor through the passage of time. Oh, September 1879 to 1880, the mansion of Bahji. Now, Baha'u'lláh is going to live there until 1892, but this section is a series of stories that took place within 1 year, 1879 to 1880. Of course, we know Baha'u'lláh will be in Bahji from September 1879 until 29th of May, 1892, and forever after. Summer to September 1879. This mansion, which increaseth in splendor. Excuse me, that quote I just read is not actually from Baha'u'lláh. It's from Udi Khamar, who built the building. So, apologies. I'm going to blame it on the fact that the attribution is wrong. So, this is why I keep to a script. Okay, so this photograph, it's nicer on the website, but here you can see on the bottom left here, you can see there's a little blue square above the door and above the ironwork above the door. There's a little marble overhang, and then there's a lamp. And behind the lamp and over the ironwork and on the overhang, there's a little blue square. And the blue square is actually what you see here enlarged. It's and set over the door. That's just an artistic thing that I did. It's not, it doesn't actually look like that. It's actually stone on stone above the door, high above the ironwork. That's the inscription that I just read. This one here. This one here, part of that inscription is in this Arabic, in the 2 lines of Arabic up here. And so these 2 pictures were provided by George Ronald Publishers, and they were used with permission. And I thank George Ronald for sharing these photographs with me. The humid and swampy region of Akka often fell prey to epidemics of typhoid, dysentery, malaria, and an epidemic of plague broke out in the countryside in the summer of 1879. All the inhabitants who could flee the center of the epidemic, which included Udi Hamar and his family who abandoned Bahji, ran for their lives. Soon after the epidemic, because no one wanted to return, Abdu'l-Baha was able to rent the mansion for a very low price, and he later purchased it. Udi Hamar died later in 1879, and he was buried in a room of the Eastern Housing Complex in Bahji, in the southeast corner of the mansion wall. Baha'u'lláh stated that Udi Hamar had not known, while he built and lived in the mansion of Bahji, for whom it had been intended, and he affirmed that the mansion had been erected to serve as the scene of his transcendent glory and to be the seat of God in his day. Udi Hamar had been inspired while he was building the mansion to engrave on stone an Arabic phrase above the door which read, I'm so embarrassed I misquoted this, I can't even tell you. Greetings and salutations rest upon this mansion which increaseth in splendor through the passage of time. Manifold wonders and marvels are found therein, and pens are baffled in attempting to describe them. Once Baha'u'lláh moved into the mansion of Bahji, these prophetic words would be fulfilled until the end of time. September 1879, Baha'u'llah's arrival at the mansion of Bahji. This just, I thought, was a great illustration because it's people arriving, and this is a story of people standing behind and watching. This is another one of my favorite stories in the whole chronology. Let me just, okay. After renting the mansion, Abdu'l-Baha prepared it for Baha'u'lláh, and members of his extended family began moving in. When preparations were completed, Baha'u'lláh left the house of Abud, where he had been staying, about 2 hours after sunset on one evening of September 1879, and accompanied by Mirza Agha, his amanuensis, Baha'u'lláh rode his white donkey to Bahji, his new home, for the very first time. Nabil, the historian, and Haji Muhammad Tahiri Malmiri, also a historian, saw Baha'u'lláh pass in the street below their apartment near the White Market in Akka, and they decided to follow the manifestation of God. They wanted to accompany him as he was getting to his house on the first day and offer prayers for him. And then they had the plan to circumambulate around the house and return to Akka. That was their plan. So they ran down the steps and they followed Baha'u'lláh 50 steps behind. When they arrived, Baha'u'lláh entered the mansion lit by a single large 3-wicked oil lamp. In order to circumambulate, Haji Muhammad Tahiri Malmiri and Nabil approached the mansion, but found themselves faced with a packed crowd assembled around the footpath on all 4 sides of the building. They could hear breathing and murmuring, but they soon realized the crowd was not made of physical human beings, but rather a vision of the entire concourse on high, assembled around the mansion, circumambulating the mansion of Bahji, the throne of their Lord, and welcoming Baha'u'lláh home. They walked 30 steps away from the mansion and circumambulated the mansion in a muddy field, still feeling the presence of the holy crowd. Then they prostrated themselves on the ground in front of the mansion's gate, and they returned to Akka. On their way back, they were caught in a torrential rain and arrived 4 hours after sunset, right before the Ottoman guards were locking the city gate for the night. After this mystical experience, Nabil suggested to Haji Muhammad Tahiri Malmiri to hold a vigil, and Haji Muhammad made tea while Nabil composed poems. That's my kind of night. By sunrise, Nabil had covered both sides of a large sheet of paper in poems, which the two friends sent to Baha'u'lláh as a gift, along with 2 sugar cones. When Baha'u'lláh received their gift, he revealed a tablet in their honor, accepting their pilgrimage to the mansion, and gave Nabil the title of Bulbul, nightingale, and Haji Muhammad Tahiri Malmiri the title of Bahaj, the blissful. A mansion fit for the King of Glory. Udi Khamar had built a true palace. The mansion of Bahji was spacious. It was richly designed. It was well equipped. It was surrounded by a delightful grove of fragrant lemon and orange trees. Perfect for someone from the district of Nur like Baha'u'lláh, and it had a large, beautiful pond. Beyond the mansion, the large garden was surrounded by a very high wall, and it was closer to Akka than it was to Mazra'ih. In one of his tablets, Baha'u'lláh describes the mansion of Bahji as the seat and the scene of his transcendent glory, asserting it was built in order to be the seat of God in his day. The mansion itself, the building, was particularly charming. It had a wraparound covered stone balcony and painted frescoes, surrounded by open fields and shady pine trees. From Bahji, one could see the high minarets of the mosques of Akka, the bright blue waters of the Mediterranean, and across the bay, the dim outline of Mount Carmel in Haifa, 17 kilometers or 10.5 miles away. But it was far enough away from Akka to be protected from the hectic energy of the city and the gloomy atmosphere of the stony surroundings with no plants or flowers or trees or anything green. Baha'u'lláh would spend the next 13 years and the last 13 years of his life in Bahji, except when he was spending winters in Akka with Sarihanum and the rest of the Holy Family. After a quarter of a century spent in poverty and hardship, Baha'u'lláh, now 62 years old, would spend the last decade of his ministry setting the example for how to befittingly glorify God in the management of his newfound affluence, frugal for himself, wise in his investments for the expansion and propagation of the faith. Baha'u'llah's life in Bahji could be adequately described as regal, but never luxurious, befitting of a manifestation of God, but never extravagant. Baha'u'lláh and the Holy Family always lived simply and modestly and never wasted money on selfish luxuries. I'm going to stop saying that this is my favorite story because this is my favorite story in the chronology. I'm kidding. I love them all. But I really love this one the best. Lightning and thunder, Baha'u'llah's freedom of movement. I am so happy I found a 19th century photo of a white donkey. Can't even tell you. Baha'u'llah used to ride a white donkey named Barq, lightning, to move about the countryside of Akka freely. His donkey earned its charming name because he was fast as lightning. When Baha'u'llah rode his white donkey in the surrounding areas, he was always accompanied by a servant. When Barq died, the Persian Baha'is sent Baha'u'llah another white donkey, which Baha'u'llah named Rad, thunder. In this way, Baha'u'llah was able to freely explore the countryside around Bahji, visiting nearby gardens, Riḍván, Bustani Kabir, Junayneh, Firdaus, Ashraf, but also further afield, visiting nearby Druze villages such as Yirkih and Abu Sinan, and other sites closer to Akka, such as the Tal-i Farkar, Napoleon's Hill, also known as the Tell of Akka, and a hill named Sarmariyeh, also known as Bukatul Hamra, covered in red poppies and anemones. Baha'u'llah frequently visited Akka, where people now reverently bowed whenever he appeared in public. During his stays in Akka, Baha'u'llah allowed all the believers to enter his presence, where they sat spellbound by his utterances and exhilarating by the outpouring of his favors. On his visits to the prison city, Baha'u'llah generally stayed in his beautiful sea-facing room at the house of Abud and visited his brother Mirza Muhammad Kuli, close to the Khani Shabiridi, the northern caravanserai. The Khani Avamid is the southern caravanserai. Baha'u'llah's attention, modesty, and detachment. This is one of Baha'u'llah's own pen cases from the International Baha'i Archives. Baha'u'llah was deeply attentionate to all those around him, showering them with his caring generosity. One day, a Baha'i named Mirza Muhammad Kuli offered Baha'u'llah an overcoat, and Baha'u'llah was so thoughtful as to write him a tablet telling him he had worn the coat one day as a bounty on his part. Haji Muhammad Ali Afnan, a cousin of the Bab, sent Baha'u'llah a length of white flannel, and Baha'u'llah thanked him in a tablet, explaining that although he had been used to wearing black flannel coats since he left Baghdad, he had ordered a white one to be made as a token of his grace and favor towards the Afnan. Baha'u'llah often ordered little gifts to be sent to people, a set of dishes to Haji Muhammad Ali Afnan, or spectacles and a case as a gift to some Ottoman officials. One day, Baha'u'llah instructed Haji Mirza Buzurg to copy the Qadsiyeh-i Varkiyeh, the Ode of the Dove, which Baha'u'llah had revealed in Suleymaniyeh, and offered him a pen case, which is why I used a pen case to illustrate this image, as a gift, which was later placed in the archives of the House of the Bab in Shiraz. Another time, Baha'u'llah summoned Haji Mirza Habibullah Afnan, also a famous historian, who wrote the Baha'i biography of the province of Fars and Shiraz. Another time, Baha'u'llah summoned Haji Mirza Habibullah Afnan and spoke to him about his studies and gave him a precious bottle of rose water from Kamsar in Kashan, which had taken 40 days to reach the Holy Land, and told the young man, God has created this rose water for such a day as this, which is the Lord of days. Baha'u'llah himself had few personal needs, which he tended to very modestly. When he needed a new pair of shoes, for example, he gave Haji Ali Yazdi, who was going to Istanbul, an old pair of his slippers for size. I love this story. This is a story on revelation and the shrill sound of a reed pen. This is a cut reed pen, which belonged to Baha'u'llah. It's from the International Archives. You can even see the tip where it's been dipped in India ink. These pens are called kalams. I use them for my art. They're wonderful pens. They're phenomenal for writing Persian and Arabic. And they screech on the paper, kind of like nails on a chalkboard, but like less intense. just like kind of wood against wood kind of sound, like, and it makes a shrill sound. And so this is the story of the shrill sound of a reed pen. The incoming letters addressed to Baha'u'lláh were received by Mirza Agha, who would read them to Baha'u'lláh after having obtained his permission to do so. Once he had read the letter, Baha'u'lláh would dictate the reply, entering the state of revelation without marking a pause and needing any time to compose himself for the reply, to think, to contemplate. It was immediate. He entered immediately into the state of revelation. After 26 years as his amanuensis, Mirza Agha was always well prepared. Before him on his writing desk, which was probably low to the ground, and he was probably on a cushion, there was a large ink pot, the size of a small bowl, filled with India ink, very, very dark form of ink made with soot. 10 to 12 of these pens, reed pens, kalams, and thick stacks of paper in large sheets. So like large sheets like this, probably. These reed pens and that enormous amount of paper, large amount of pens, and large amount of ink allowed Mirza Agha to take notes very, 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 very quickly, notes that he could not read. Baha'u'lláh had to help them read them because Baha'u'lláh would see the revelation, and he would immediately, it's like he knew, he could recall all revelation from past and present. He could instantly re-reveal something he had revealed 20 years ago and include it in a tablet, word for word. That's amazing. And he could see the revelation writing and know it was like re-revealing when he was looking at it's just an amazing process. The how we have Baha'u'llah's authenticated tablets transcribed from these illegible sheets and sheets and sheets of Mirza Agha is just an unbelievable process. But anyway, Baha'u'lláh would pace the room while revealing, and the holy verses would flow from his lips at incredible speed while Mirza Agha transcribed his utterances in the shorthand of his own invention. And because kalams were wooden and hollow, they made a shrill, distinctive sound while Mirza Agha was writing at this lightning fast speed, and it could be heard 20 paces away. And in some of his tablets, Baha'u'lláh makes reference to the shrill of the pen of glory. Baha'u'lláh revealed with such speed, transcribed by Mirza Agha with matching swiftness, that the ink of the first word was never dry when Mirza Agha had covered the entire page, and he would just move the page over and then just start another page. And same thing, like the ink never had the time to dry from the first word when he had covered the whole sheet. Sometimes he would just break kalams, like as he was writing so quickly, the pen would just break and he would just have to take another pen. That's why he always had 10 or 12 pens there. And sometimes he wrote so fast that the pen just fly out of his hand. And sometimes he just couldn't keep up. And so he would just simply tell Baha'u'lláh, I am incapable of writing. And in those moments, Baha'u'lláh would turn to him and ask him what was the last thing he wrote, and then re-reveal from that word or that half word or that, syllable. Mirza Agha revelation writing was invented by Mirza Agha. I mean, in the world today, there are probably a handful of people who can read it. It is so specialized. And it was his own, it's absolutely illegible to everyone except for Mirza Agha, except for now, of course, if there are people in the world who can read it. No word was written clearly or in full. It was always like parts of syllables and just half words and like if there was something maybe like just in shorthand, if there's a term that Baha'u'lláh used often enough, maybe like alawapa, there would be like a symbol for that, something. It's like that kind of shorthand. Anyway, I'm just giving you examples, but they're not. I'm imagining, so I probably shouldn't have said anything. But anyway, once revelation had stopped, you had these sheets of paper which looked less than Arabic and more like just pieces of just hairs dropped on a page. That's what it looks like. It just looks like hairs dropped on a page. And Mirza Agha did his best to recopy his transcription in proper Arabic or Persian or mix of Persian and Arabic, but he couldn't read his handwriting. And so he had to ask Baha'u'llah's help in deciphering it. And Baha'u'lláh would just know the revelation no matter where it was. And divine revelation was like, I mean, people who have seen it said it was like an irrepressible torrent that flowed through Baha'u'lláh. And in Baha'u'llah's own words, he testifies, this thing is not from me, but from one who is almighty and all-knowing. Now we have, between 1880 and 1885, we have Bahji, Yirkih, and Haifa. And this is going to be the last section for today. Between the 1st and the 17th of June, 1880, the significance of Abdu'l-Baha's visit to Mizat Pasha in Beirut. This is an excerpt from the newspaper article that was published about Abdu'l-Baha's arrival in Beirut, and this is a contemporary postcard from the 1880s, 1890s. So this is the story. Midhat Pasha was the governor general of Damascus, one of the most brilliant Ottoman statesmen of his time and the leader of the constitutional reform movement of 1876. In May 1880, he was on an inspection tour of Palestine and did everything in his power to meet Abdu'l-Baha, sending him a message through a courier that read, "I yearn to meet His Excellency." Midhat Pasha was so enchanted with Abdu'l-Baha that he asked him to return to Beirut with him, but Abdu'l-Baha very courteously and politely declined. When he was back in Lebanon, he wrote to Abdu'l-Baha a short poem about his desire to meet him in Beirut, and Baha'u'lláh encouraged his son Abdu'l-Baha to accept the governor's invitation. Abdu'l-Baha visited Beirut between June 1st and June 17th, 1880, and his arrival made the front page of Tamarat al-Funun, the newspaper there, on Tuesday, 8th of June, 1880, and this was the headline: His Excellency, the learned, erudite, intelligent, and illustrious Abbas Effendi, resident of the city of Akka, has arrived in our city. The purpose of his arrival is change of air. May God prolong his well-being. Resident or prisoner of the city of Akka, up for debate. Abdu'l-Baha spent most of his time in Beirut with Midhat Pasha and met important figures in the Arab world, including Sheikh Mohammed Abdu, the future Grand Mufti of Egypt. Abdu'l-Baha's visit in Beirut, while still being a prisoner of the Ottoman Empire in Akka, at the express invitation of an Ottoman governor of one of the largest cities in the Ottoman Empire, was an undeniable sign of Baha'u'llah's splendor, his grandeur, his majesty. And it elevated the prestige of the Baha'i faith to an entirely new level. And another thing that happened during this visit is that we got possibly the most beautiful tablet ever from Baha'u'lláh about Abdu'l-Baha. So on the 9th of June, 1880, the Lawh-e-Arzeba, the tablet of the land of Ba. And here you have a spiritual map, which you can't see in its entirety, but you have Akka on the bottom and Beirut on the top. And that's what's being talked about in this tablet, because it's Baha'u'llah's in Akka and Abdu'l-Baha's in Beirut, and then Akka and Baha'u'lláh miss Abdu'l-Baha, and Beirut is blessed by Abdu'l-Baha. So it's beautiful. It's so beautiful. If you want to read it in the original Arabic, please go to the Utterance Project YouTube channel. It's so beautiful. It's subtitled in English. It's very beautiful. Abdu'l-Baha's visit to Beirut occasioned the Allah ever revealed in honor of Abdu'l-Baha, called the Lawh-e-Arzeba, tablet of the land of Ba. In this tablet, Baha'u'llah exalts the loftiness of Abdu'l-Baha's station and his exalted rank in the faith, something Baha'u'lláh does increasingly as his earthly life is approaching its end. He becomes more and more vocal about Abdu'l-Baha in his utterances in public, but also in his tablets, in his revealed tablets, something he did not do before. In this tablet, Baha'u'lláh gives voice to the land of Akka that laments the presence of Abdu'l-Baha's footsteps from it. And he gives voice to the land of Beirut that rejoices in his footsteps on it. Baha'u'lláh affirms that all the atoms of the earth announced Abdu'l-Baha's movement from Akka to Beirut to all created things in the universe. And he concludes the tablet by expressing, and Baha'u'lláh concludes the tablet by expressing yearning to meet with Abdu'l-Baha, his very own son, again. In this meaningful tablet, Baha'u'lláh testifies to Abdu'l-Baha's station with a moving paragraph that recounts the bounties derived from proximity to Abdu'l-Baha, another theme that he will develop over and over again in tablets and in utterances. The proximity to Abdu'l-Baha and the effect of being near Abdu'l-Baha on things, on atoms, on people. That is why we have holy shrines, because the physical bodies of Baha'u'lláh, the Bab, and Abdu'l-Baha have an impact on the things that are around them. Living and inert. This is this passage. Blessed, doubly blessed, is the ground which his footsteps have trodden. The eye that hath been cheered by the beauty of his countenance. The ear that hath been honored by hearkening to his call. The heart that hath tasted the sweetness of his love. The breast that hath dilated through his remembrance. The pen that hath voiced his praise. The scroll that hath borne the testimony of his writings. The scroll that hath borne the testimony of his writings. Animate, inanimate. So shortly after Beirut, Baha'u'lláh and Abdu'l-Baha rejoin in a Druze village called Yarka between the 18th and the 25th of June, 1880. This is a picture of Druze villages around the time of Baha'u'lláh. I couldn't find a picture of Yarka. Shortly after Abdu'l-Baha's return from Beirut, Baha'u'lláh journeyed from Bahji to the Druze village of Yirkih, 8 kilometers or 5 miles northeast of Akka, where he remained for 7 nights. Abdu'l-Baha joined Baha'u'lláh for the last 4 nights of his stay. When Baha'u'lláh stayed in Yirkih, he used to occupy a room that was long kept intact as a place of veneration. This next vignette introduces a theme in this last part, which is in a very, very unfortunate theme, is that many people close to Baha'u'lláh die in this section. His sister, the wife of the Bab, his brother, his wife, his grandson. So I'm going to divide the sorrows up because it's too much for just one part. It's very, very sad. It's extremely sad. So we're gonna only today, we're only going to look at the passing of Baha'u'llah's sister, Sarihanum. And what you're looking at is an attempt to convey the emotion of grief, a digital painting. Hold on. So yes, I'm actually going to talk about 2 passing here, the passing of the wife of the Bab and the passing of Sarihanum. Sarihanum had married Hanum's brother in 1832. She was the one who had encouraged her father, Mirza Buzurg, to arrange Hanum's marriage to Baha'u'lláh, her younger brother. Baha'u'lláh was very attached to his sister Sarihanum. She was a devoted and steadfast Baha'i until the end of her life. Baha'u'lláh and Sarihanum had a very close relationship. He exclusively called her Ukht, sister. in his frequent and intimate tablets to her, in which he disclosed his sufferings and banishments, his solitude in Sulaymaniyeh, closing one letter by tenderly asking his sister, his older sister, "Do thou always write about thine affairs?" Sarihanum passed away in 1880 at the age of 65, and she was buried near the shrine of Bibi Zubaydah, not too far from Tehran. In a tablet, Baha'u'lláh states that whoever has visited Sarihanum's grave has visited him. Baha'u'llah's grief was heartbreaking in the tablets he revealed after her passing, and in which he speaks of her steadfastness and recounts her sufferings after calling her passing a calamitous event. And this is a quote from Baha'u'lláh from one of his tablets of visitation for his sister. She was indeed oppressed and quietly endured that which none but God is able to recount. Blessed is she. My glory be upon her for having endured patiently for the sake of God and for having sustained hardships in his straight path. And now a deeply heartbreaking event. 15th of September, 1882, Khadija Begum, the wife of the Bab, passes away. This homage to Khadija Begum is very, very deeply, deeply personal. Things and places associated, 9 places and things associated with her life with the Bab. The room where the Bab was born, the Bab's mother's room, the outskirt of Shiraz where the Bab went to walk, the Bab's sitting room, the upper floor where the Bab declared his mission, inside the declaration chamber, another picture of the Bab's sitting room, the tree marking the resting place of the Bab's infant son Ahmad in Babi Dukhtaran, the grave of the Bab's wife in Chahshirag, Shiraz. Khadija Begum was a descendant of Khadija, the wife of the Prophet Muhammad, who was the first person to recognize her husband as a manifestation of God. 13 centuries later, like her illustrious ancestor, Khadija Begum claimed the everlasting honor of being the first to recognize the Bab station, a fact confirmed by Baha'u'lláh, who affirmed that she, quote, found the fragrance of the garment of the merciful before the creation of the world of being. Khadija Begum had begged Baha'u'lláh for his family to be united with the family of the Bab through marriage. Baha'u'lláh had granted Khadija Begum's dearest wish. But when her brother and nephew left for the Holy Land to arrange the wedding, they left Khadija behind. And the betrayal literally broke her heart. She never recovered. She fell ill and died. And she died 2 months after their departure on the 15th of September, 1882. 3 hours after her passing, her devoted servant, Fize, who had been at her side from the time of her marriage with the Bab, also died. Sarihanum had hoped for decades that she would be able to meet Khadija Begum, because after all, who says twin manifestations also says wives of twin manifestations. And the 2 wives had wanted to meet each other because they were both married to a manifestation of God. And so Sarihanum's last years, she died 4 years later, her last 4 years were shadowed by the sadness of never being able to meet Khadija Begum in this life. And Baha'u'lláh also experienced a deep and profound grief at Khadija Begum's passing, describing it as a, quote, sorrow like unto the life vein coursed throughout the body and in every artery produced its effect. Baha'u'lláh went so far as to reveal the epitaph for her tombstone, which read, "He is the eternal, verily the exalted leaf hath heard the call of the divine lote tree and hath taken her flight unto it." 1299, which is 1882. Perhaps the most astounding fact is that Khadija Begum, like her husband, is a martyr. She is the only female martyr in the family of the Bab, and she was elevated to this rank by Baha'u'lláh in this tablet. the heart of Tamareh-e-Ulia, the most exalted fruit, was verily consumed by the fire of separation. For that reason, before God, she is regarded as a martyr. Thank you very much. This is it for today. We will pick up tomorrow with a cheerful bit of news about the first publication of Baha'u'llah's writings. But today we're leaving on a sad note, unfortunately. But we have to leave on this sad note because after speaking of the passing of the wife of the primal point, the Bab, there's nothing else I can say. Nothing can follow that. So we're going to leave in remembrance of her today, and then we'll take up tomorrow on a more lighthearted note. Tomorrow, unfortunately, will be our last session when Baha'u'lláh is alive, because the session on Friday is going to be his ascension. And so he will be alive for the first few sections, but then after that, it's his passing. So it's very sad. I wish you all a good night, and then we're going to do the questions offline. Thank you so much to Clearwater Baha'is, to Firm Foundation Academy and Desert Rose Baha'i Institute for making this narration of the chronologies possible. And hope everyone can join us. Please don't forget to subscribe. We work very hard at producing good content, and we need subscribers. So please subscribe.